Can you describe us a little bit the work of the expert mechanism on the right of indigenous peoples?
The purpose of the mechanism is to provide advice to the Human Rights Council about the rights of indigenous peoples. Their job is to do studies and research at the request of the Human Rights Council. Like right now, they've completed a study on the indigenous people's right to education, and that's already been completed, and we're still looking at how that will impact indigenous people. They are completing now another study on the indigenous people's right to participation and decision making that affect them. And what the mechanism is doing is they are defining the rights that are in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and they are fleshing them out. They're taking some of those rights that are articulated in there, and telling the Human Rights Council that this is how these rights should be applied, how it should work, and so it's a very important role, and it's necessary. And they have a lot of work to do. Expert mechanism. There's many references to different kinds of rights in the Declaration, and they have to expand on those rights. So they'll be here for many years to work on that.
And what is the relation between this expert mechanism and the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues?
The Permanent Forum is in New York, and it's a body of 16 human rights experts, and they have a broader mandate in looking into a wide spectrum of issues that affect indigenous people, like environment, education, health, all these the social issues, land, territory. They have and their job is to compile what information they can on these issues and to produce a report. It's different from the expert mechanism because they're not really doing studies, specific studies on specific rights. Their area is to advise the United Nations system and agencies on all of these issues that affect indigenous peoples. So it's a different mandate between the two, and it's a bigger body, and it's also a very, very large. There's a lot of participation in their meetings. You get about 2,000 people attending their meeting. Yes.
After the adoption of the declaration, what is really changing for indigenous peoples?
Well, I think that what's changing is that indigenous people now have a legal tool to help them assert their rights. Before the declaration, they didn't have that. They didn't have a document that could guide them to articulate what those rights are. With the declaration now printed in many languages, indigenous people have an understanding of what their rights are, and it helps them when they have to deal with states, multinationals, other local communities in their area, regional governments, so that it helps them clarify their thinking, clarify the debate. And I think it's been helping a lot of people have a better understanding of what their rights are. Not only indigenous people, but non-indigenous people are being educated on those rights, and so it's also very helpful. Now, the declaration is not a binding instrument. It's not international law. It's just a declaration. However, the rights that are articulated in there are binding in other instruments, like the right to self-determination, which is mentioned in the Declaration in Article 3, which states that indigenous peoples are peoples and have a right to self-determination. But that article is also in the covenants, on civil and political rights, and social and cultural rights. So that's Article 1. So those are binding instruments. So it leads. The Declaration points to those binding international law, and that's what should apply, and that's what makes the Declaration so important and so strong, because the governments are obligated to follow those laws, which governments were reluctant to recognize in the past.
And you think that the expert mechanism can help the application of the declaration by the governments?
Yes, it issues advice It doesn't give conclusions or recommendations. It gives advice to the Human Rights Council, which is made up of 54 states, I believe. And those states have to take that advice, and publish them and present them to states and telling states this is how the right to education for Indigenous people should be applied, or the right of participation. This is how the experts are saying this right should be used. So it plays an important role in defining for states how to apply the declaration.
You have been involved for many years in these works. You are satisfied about the steps that the United Nations have done for Indigenous peoples?
Well, satisfied wouldn't be the right word I would use. I would say that it's improving. It's better. When I started first coming here 25 years ago in 1987, there was only one group, the Working Group on Indigenous Populations, and there was no declaration. I think when I started to come, I think we had 12 or 16 articles in the draft declaration. So many things have changed since that we have the declaration. It has 46 articles. We had now the expert mechanism. We have the permanent forum on Indigenous issues. We also have many Indigenous avenues in other ones, in other UN agencies like WIPO and the ITU and other the Convention on Biodiversity. All of these have avenues now. The Indigenous people are mentioned, so Indigenous people are now getting involved in a broader range of larger field in the United Nations system, and slowly the United Nations is hiring Indigenous people. We have a few Indigenous people now working on Indigenous issues, that are Indigenous people, and it's very important to have that. And so there's a lot of change that has taken in 25 years. It's slow. It takes a long time. I always say the United Nations moves at the speed of a glacier, but it does move, and things do happen. We have a long way to go yet. It's not we haven't reached the end, and it's just just another step, and we got to use those steps to create more steps, and that's what we're going to do. So, am I satisfied? I'm satisfied that we've made gains, and I won't be satisfied until we get everything that we think we need to survive.
Which are next steps?
The next steps is really the implementation of the declaration. The rights that are enshrined in the declaration need to be applied, and there's resistance to that still from states and the private sector. We still have to find ways to educate states and ordinary people on the declaration, and we have to find ways to apply those rights that are articulated in there. And it's going to be a long road. It's not going to happen overnight. But I think in 20 years from now we'll be looking back at the declaration and saying, "Wow, what a fortunate thing that we were able to get that declaration because of the changes that have taken." They'll be slow, and we're waiting for court cases in certain states that'll be using the declaration to help the judgment in a positive way to defend the rights of Indigenous people. And that'll be significant as the jurisprudence builds up over the years with the declaration. It'll be a very significant event. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at that Indigenous people asserting the rights that are articulated in the declaration, and where it goes from that. So that's the next step.
And your personal experience about all these years with Indigenous peoples, can you tell us something?
Well, I think that when I started coming here, there's such a diversity of Indigenous people from all over the world. We always we knew there's Indigenous people in North, Central, and South America, and we knew there were Indigenous people in Australia and New Zealand. But it was news to find Indigenous people in Scandinavia, and Indigenous people in Africa and Asia, and and we learned about them. Okay, all right. And there are so I learned a lot from that, and also so much solidarity there is between Indigenous people, because we all have the same struggle. We've all been disempowered, we've all been dispossessed, and we're all fighting for that recognition and the right to exercise self-determination. And so it was a learning process for me, and even defining. I knew I was Indigenous, I knew as a Mohawk who I was, but I didn't understand really totally what rights there are, what we have, and also I didn't understand the UN system or the international system. So we had to learn how to do that. Had to learn how to be diplomatic. We had to learn to. We had to be a little more sophisticated in how we articulate our positions, and so it's been a tremendous learning process. But I've learned a lot from not only Indigenous people but non-Indigenous people who are here to support and help. A lot of sympathy, a lot of resistance, and some of the absolutely silly positions that states take. That we don't have Indigenous people in our country, or Indigenous people are less than all other peoples. We still feel that, and we still feel that racism is still here, and we're still fighting that. It's so ingrained. I call it institutionalized racism. There is so much institutionalized racism against Indigenous peoples, not only in our home countries but internationally, and we're still fighting that. And we, in my experience, is that it's there, and it continues to be there. And although we're chipping away, it's reducing and reducing that, we still have a lot to do. But I feel optimistic. And if anything, I've learned here is that as long as we're minorities, we have to continue to struggle. And if you stop struggling, is when we disappear. And that's what states want us to do. They would love if Indigenous people disappeared. Because then they go, then we would be assimilated, and the states would say, well, we've gotten rid of the Indigenous problem because now they've gone, but we can't let that happen, and I won't let that happen. I won't let our people disappear, and we're going to teach our children, our children's children, not to disappear, and learn how to use the Declaration, use the UN to make sure we survive the future generations.
I think is the same spirituality beyond the difference, no?
Yes. I think the connection to the earth that Indigenous people have, because we all live on the earth, and we're not, we don't distance ourselves. I think a problem with many modern societies in developed countries is that they lose that connection to the land and to the environment, and the vegetation and everything, and they become lost people. And Indigenous people, we cannot become lost. We can't become like that, because we have a heritage that the Creator gave to us that sustains us, and we have to keep that connection to what sustains us. If we lose that connection, then we will abuse that what sustains us, and have pollution and what's happening now in the world.
Thank you very much, Kenneth.